This year is the lead-up to the centennial of America's longest road, U.S. Route 20. This highway that goes right through Elgin has a long history before Congress put it on the map in 1926. 90 years before, the Chicago-Galena Stagecoach line followed much of the same path. It later became Illinois Route 5 and also bore the name Atlantic Pacific Yellowstone Highway. In honor of the upcoming centennial of US 20, our planning team chose the theme of transportation and found 7 characters that left their mark on Elgin's roads.
Actors will once again tell their character's story first person, allowing you to step into the shoes of those who played a pivotal role in improving Elgin's transportation network. Through their stories, you will likely feel something deeper about Elgin and its people, both past and present. As you join us for this interpretive program, we sincerely hope that you will leave with an appreciation and understanding of the lives and legacies of those who have gone before us.
And if just 7 minutes per story wasn't enough for you, visit us at the museum sometime to get more of the story. We're glad to walk with you.
George B. Richardson was a Civil War veteran of the 134th Illinois Infantry and eventually the superintendent of the David C. Cook Publishing Company. In 1900, Mr. Richardson became the owner of the first private automobile here in Elgin, ordered at the Chicago Auto Show, an event that is still held annually today. The car was a Waverly manufacturing vehicle made in Indianapolis. It ran on 4 batteries that took the driver up to 30 miles with a top speed of 16 miles per hour. The Elgin Daily Courier described it as a perfect machine. Mr. Richardson died just 3 years later, having been stricken with what was called a stroke of paralysis during a Saturday drive in his revered auto. He was remembered in 1903 as being generous and charitable, bringing intense energies to all of his pursuits.
Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce you to David A. McBride, immigrant, innovator, and Elgin's first Buick dealer.
Good day, friends. The Elgin Courier-News once described me as one of their most progressive and picturesque characters, a man who figured prominently in the growth and the development of Elgin. I was a successful businessman and achieved many civic pursuits. My name is David A. McBride, Elgin's premier purveyor of horseless contrivances, or better known as Elgin's first automobile dealer. Do you detect a slight hint of the old country in my voice? A slight burr, perhaps? Well, it's been tempered by a Midwestern twang over many years, but I was born in Ireland, December 27th, 1856, in County Monaghan. In 1872, when I was 15 or 16 years old, my family emigrated to America and we settled in what was then known as North Plano. My father was originally a farmer. In 1880, we moved to Elgin proper, and my father started a successful coal business, which was still thriving. Well, was still thriving at the time of my death. My brother and my cousin W.H. Brady took over that coal business from my father. And my father and I, we got along well enough, so well in fact that we built a small steamboat which chugged up and down the mighty Fox River betwixt South Elgin and Bonnie Dundee. The sight of us on that boat, which the locals named the Dauntless, must have caused quite a stir back in the day. I am honored to say that I did achieve a bit of daunt myself as I matured, allowing me to become the successful businessman that I did. I was educated in the Elgin public school system. Go Maroons! And in 1885, I married a lovely Elgin girl named Margaret McEwen. Margaret and I were blessed with 3 sons, Howard, David Jr., and Leslie. Also had 1 daughter we named Flossie. Well, Flossie grew to and eventually married Carl Parkin. Well, Carl Parkin managed the Diamond T truck sales for McBride Brothers, which we'll discuss more later. Thus keeping not only the family in the business, but the business in the family. Well, Flossie took over those truck sales when Carl left her a widow. Myself, I was in the construction and the building trades for many years, eventually using those skills to start building windmills. Oh, how I loved my windmills. I know it sounds like a bit of Elgin's own Don Quixote, but trust me, I was building them, not tilting at them. I came up with a number of innovations for the windmill as well, including the back gear mechanism. And my understanding is that one of my windmills was preserved and is still standing today, right near the corner of Highland Avenue and North State Street, which I understand you call Route 31. Now, outside of windmills, I always had an interest in all of the farm mechanisms. And my brothers and I, in 1903, started a business selling farm implements. Well, with our mutual interest in mechanics, we naturally progressed into a new form of transportation, the automobile. And in 1906, we moved our business to 26 North Grove Street, where we established the McBride Brothers Company. In 1909, we signed a contract with Buick to become their exclusive agency. Now, I prefer your modern term, dealership. But also in that year, 1909, we sold a record-breaking 22 Buicks. Now, keep in mind, this was at a time where 2 or 3 or 4 sales a year was the average. So my brothers and I recognized early on that the popularity of the automobile and our business thrived. So it shouldn't be surprising that not only did we own the first agency in Elgin, but we also owned one of the first automobiles. It was a small 1-cylinder Oldsmobile that was steered with a lever. Now, we should have owned a Buick. But that Oldsmobile came fully loaded, right down to the bicycle bell to warn pedestrians we were coming. In 1916, I bought the entirety of the McBride Brothers Company from my brothers in order to run it with my 2 sons, Wesley and Thomas. We also moved the agency and the showroom to 152-156 South Grove Avenue, or South Grove Street, with a used car dealership directly across the street. Now, McBride Brothers was the oldest, largest, and most successful agency in Northern Illinois, selling 6,000 Buicks and 11,000 used cars right here in Elgin. The 1929 Buick, that was sold right off the McBride Brothers lot in 1929 to a family here in Elgin. You'll learn more about her in a little while. In 1965, the McBride Brothers Company was sold to a Buick Zone service manager, L.J. McGrath, whom I believe you may have already met. If the name McBride is sounding familiar, well, Perhaps you're familiar with McBride Street, which runs along the east bank of the Fox River, starting at Ann Street, right by the library, and traveling up to Lincoln Avenue. If you're a bicyclist, I encourage you to ride right along the river on McBride Avenue, which meets up with the beautiful Fox River Trail bike path. If you're not so fond of bicycling, I ask that you ramble up Douglas Avenue to see my residence and the many other beautiful homes in that neighborhood. Well, my wife and my children survived my death in November of 1927 by a heart attack, and I did die in my home located at 891 Douglas Avenue, my favorite street in Elgin. Perhaps second favorite street if I consider South Grove, where the automobile business was centered. I appreciate you listening to me today. I ask that your lives and your livelihoods here in Elgin be as safe and as happy and as prosperous as mine was. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. McBride. This beautifully restored 1929 Buick is a rare series 116 sports touring sedan. It has an interesting Elgin story. It was sold by McBride Buick to a resident on the 400 block of Jefferson Street, right here in Elgin. The original purchase price was $1,225. And in 1954, during hard times, the family sold the well-used vehicle to Ralph Lehman for $25. The Lehman family used the car for a while before it sat idle in their garage. And then in 1990, Joe Lehman did a full restoration that has won several prestigious awards. Aside from a little carburetor trouble, the car still runs very well. It is owned by Ralph Lehman's grandsons, Brett and Chad Roxworthy, who have made it available for your viewing enjoyment today. Take a minute to look around, but please don't touch.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce one of Elgin's greatest advocates for motor cars, Mr. Theodore Schmitz.
Good day and welcome to Elgin. My name is Theodore J. Schmitz. People know me as TJ, and I invite you to call me by that name. I came to Elgin by way of Waterbury, Connecticut, where I was born May 9th, 1867. In 1885, when I was 18, I settled in Elgin with my older brother William to work at the National Watch Factory. At the watch factory, I was foreman of the escape department for 28 years. Now, that does not mean that I was in charge of the Harry Houdini elements of the watches. The escape department is concerned with the precision of the minute hand, the wheel, the balance, the ballast, the hairspring. But that's not what we're here to talk about. Today, I want to talk to you about my role in the founding of the Elgin Motor Club, serving as its president, and some of the advancements that make the road safer for you to drive on today. Now, unquestionably, the automobile was the most exciting innovation of my lifetime, and I was fascinated from the beginning. Maybe you heard earlier on your walk about the first automobile in Elgin, owned by George Richardson of the George C. Cook Publishing Company. His 1900 Waverly Electric could reach speeds of up to 20 miles per hour. By 1902, Elgin had its first car dealership, and 3 years later, there were 60 cars on the streets of Elgin. It was becoming clear that the addition of these new vehicles to the horse and buggy traffic, the pedestrian traffic, was causing quite the disturbance in downtown Elgin. As you can imagine, the horses were easily spooked by these newfangled contraptions. This mix of traffic could be very dangerous. There were no traffic laws, no road markers, no road dividers, no signage, no speeding tickets. The Elgin Motor Club saw to it that speed limits were established. 8 miles per hour in residential areas, 6 miles per hour downtown, and 4 miles per hour around curves. We also established a school safety club where boys would join as junior members and escort school children across the streets safely. I personally advocated for the Financial Responsibility Act to ensure that irresponsible drivers who drove recklessly or drunk would face financial liability for the damages they caused. But these regulations weren't addressing the number one issue of the facing motorists in Elgin: unmarked and unpaved roads. There is nothing to signal who had the right of way. Where do you drive? But like a bolt of lightning, I was struck by the idea of painting a yellow line straight down the middle of the road that would tell clearly who belonged where. I championed the idea, and Elgin adopted the practice. It soon became standard for roads across Illinois and across the country. It even spread to certain countries around the world. Now, once Michigan attempted to claim credit for this, but they were unsuccessful in claiming what was actually an innovation from right here in Elgin. I'm told even today it's known as the Illinois Line. Unlike the Illinois Line, though, the Paved Roads Initiative took a little longer to catch on. Farmers would charge $5 per car to pull them out of the ruts and the potholes in the roads. Roads were not typically paved in concrete, which would be ideal for automobile tires. If they were paved at all, they would be paved in brick or cedar wood block. The Elgin Motor Club immediately began advocating for their improvement. We succeeded in getting many of the roads paved. In fact, Elgin got the very first state-funded concrete highway with the building in 1917 of the Fox River Trail. Folks today know it as Illinois Route 31. We also advocated for many improvements in the roads, including the third span across downtown, the Highland Avenue span, the extension of Duncan Avenue north to Dundee. And even though we began as a safety organization, a safety-focused organization, we needed to grow as a community, and connecting our community to the surrounding area was going to be essential. The Elgin Motor Club saw, naturally, roads as the future. And Route 31 was just the start. When planning began with the Ulysses S. Grant Highway, we knew that it had to include Elgin. We, along with the Elgin Commercial Club, today known as the Elgin Area Chamber of Commerce, began lobbying the state. I demanded a public hearing at the Armory. I used my influence at the watch factory to persuade the watch factory military band to drum up 400 demonstrators to come to that hearing and insist very loudly that the route go through Elgin. Well, a few hours of tumultuous negotiation in smoke-filled back rooms later, we won the highway. And today it is a part of US 20, the longest road in America, stretching from Boston, Massachusetts to Newport, Oregon. My favorite stretch, of course, is the Elgin portion, though I'm told there's some sort of bypass that takes it away from downtown these days. Anyway, my road ended in 1941 at the age of 74. I lived through a lot of change in my life, from buggy and rail to automobiles and airplanes. I'm proud to have done my part to make the transportation system what it is today. Thank you, good day, and happy motoring.
All right, thank you one more time for Theodore Schmitz.
Bunge was the proprietor of several gasoline and service stations right here at Elgin, beginning in the early 1920s, amassing what was described as a small fortune by 1929 when his 5 nephews took over the business after Mr. Bunge's death. He started his time in the auto business in the area of tires, and at the time of his death, his 5 Sinclair service stations were amongst the largest of their kind in the state. The station, located at 280 South Grove Avenue, was open 24 hours a day to accommodate every shift of watch factory workers, and customers appreciated his innovative offering of cold weather service, keeping the doors closed and the interior of the stations steam heated.
Allow me to introduce aviator and first manager of the Elgin Airport, Clarence Helm.
I'd like to tell you a bit about my life. Not because it was full of fame or fortune, but because it was full of flight, family, and faith. So please make sure your seat backs and tray tables are locked in their full upright position. Make sure your seat belts are securely fastened and your carry-on luggage is stowed. Take a flight back in time with me. My name is Clarence William Helm. Most of my friends call me CW. I was born May 15th, 1893 in Carpentersville, Illinois. I was born on a farm, son of Amos Helm and Lena Newman. I only made it through the 4th grade, but that never held me back. Now, I always believed experience was the best teacher, and life gave me plenty. I came to Elgin as a young man, and before long, I caught the aviation bug. Hard. Now, this was the 1920s, when the automobile was the real craze, including me for a short time dabbling in selling Chevys. I sold that dealership, and after a few more owners, Gerald Biggers bought it. I hear Biggers Chevy is still selling cars right here in Elgin. Most people thought that flying was for daredevils and dreamers. Yeah, they weren't wrong. We had open cockpits, no radios, and no paved runways. Flying by the seat of your pants, it wasn't just a saying back then. It's how we survived. I learned to fly from a man named Mel Avange, and in 1924, I earned my license. They called us birdmen, and to some we were crazy, but to me, every flight was freedom. I married twice in my life. First to Mary Teese in 1912. We had a son, Rudy, who inherited my love of flying. When that marriage ended, I married Mabel Evans in 1921. Together, we raised Phyllis and little Shirley, who sadly died as a baby. Mabel was my steady co-pilot through it all. Even after one afternoon crash landing in a cornfield, she swore God told her never to go up in a plane again. And she listened. Now, by 1930, I had talked Elgin's Chamber of Commerce into opening Elgin's first airport, and they named me its first manager. I mean, we had no hangars, no real roads coming in, no lights, but we had planes. I opened Elgin's first flight school, and there were times where I had to knock out a student who froze behind the controls midair before we both went down. That was the job. Now, in 1930, I was awarded the honor of flying Elgin's first airmail. Although the Great Depression, it hit aviation hard. Fewer fares, fewer passengers, more pilots out of work. I did my best to stay up in the air as long as I could. Now, in 1932, I was awarded a contract with the U.S. Weather Bureau to make daily flights from Chicago's municipal airport at 4 a.m., flying to at least 16,500 feet to collect weather data. Bought myself a brand new Alexander Eagle Rock plane in Colorado and flew it home myself. It had a J5 Wright Whirlwind engine and eventually a radio designed for blind flying. That job was about more than piloting. It was about trust. Trust in your ship, trust in your instruments, trust in God. I flew into clouds, storms, and dark skies to collect readings on barometric pressure and the cloud formations and precipitation. It was a quiet job, but dangerous. There was no autopilot, just me and my hands on the controls and the skies. Now, by the early 1940s, I shifted into defense work. When World War II came, I took on a civilian role at the U.S. Naval Air Station in Norfolk, Virginia. I trained young pilots, tested planes, and did my best to prepare others for the skies. Later, I worked at an airfield in Belleville, Illinois. I wasn't in uniform, but I served in my own way. One of my proudest moments came when a former student of mine, oh gosh, look at that. A former student of mine, Joe Sowers, passed his test to become a flight instructor for the Army Air Corps. He learned to fly at the old airport right here in Elgin, and he passed that gift on. That's what teaching is, passing the torch. Now, when World War II ended, I came back to Elgin, and I started working as a heating contractor. And the housing boom made for steady work. Wasn't as glamorous as flying, but kept families warm and bills paid. Now, I took pride in a good day's work and in growing the business. My son Rudy followed my path into aviation. He became a transport pilot for Northwest Airways, flying between Billings and Seattle, and eventually became head of transportation in Northwest Airways in Seattle before his untimely death in 1953. I still miss him every day. On November 21st, 1955, my heart gave out. I'd been under a doctor's care and advised to stay home. I passed away 422 Summit Street, my home, surrounded by my memories, my Mabel, and the city I loved. Funny, an airman living on Summit Street. But my favorite road, Airport Road, right off of Route 31. There were those who believed that I was one of the first in the Fox Valley to take to the skies. Maybe that's true, but what I really wanted was to help others find their wings. My daughter Phyllis once wrote that I was her hero, that she thought that I was wise, kind, funny, never without a joke or a twinkle in my eye. She said that she remembers flying in my lap before she could walk, with the wind in her hair and the sound of freedom in our ears. I believed in hard work, common sense, and doing your part. I believed even a man with a 4th grade education could fly to 16,500 feet and back because God was on his side. I believed in taking risks, not for glory, but for the joy of discovery. And I believed that the real heroes We're the ordinary men and women who get up every day and face their troubles head on and do their best. Quietly, humbly, and with dignity. Thank you for remembering me. Thank you for remembering the skies.
Thank you, Mr. Helm.
My
for this
pleasure.
Lovely morning. May flights of angels sing you to your rest.
Amen.
In 1911, John M. Murphy, one of the city's first auto dealers, conceived of a better street sweeper, one that could handle the messy combination of street dust, manure, and debris of the time in a clean and efficient way. The first American tower and tank sweeper was built in 1914 after more than 2 years of trial and development, and the city of Elgin purchased its first in 1920. Costing the city $6,000 at the time, the equivalent of over $96,000 today. By 1922, the company was named Elgin Street Sweeper Company, and its products were used in more than 175 U.S. cities. Elgin sweepers are still a top choice of cities around the world. The city of Elgin dropped this pelican off for you to see today, a sweeper right here in Elgin at the walk.
Well, isn't this something? A whole bunch of the living come to visit the dearly departed.
I think there may be filming going on here, so let's be on our best behavior. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to introduce the first commissioner of Elgin Township Roads, Charles Harrison Burnage.
Well, thank you, sir. Very kind. Yeah, they said these newfangled gadgets are EMF detectors, so that they can capture me on film. I think that's wonderful. The things you folks can do these days. Yes, I'm Charles Harrison Burnage, fancy name. Call me Charlie. I was born in 1871. Does that number ring a bell? The year the Great Chicago Fire. Thank you. You know your history. You know, old Abe Lincoln said, if you don't remember your history, you're doomed to repeat it, right? Yes, indeed. I didn't come into the world as dramatic as all that, though. No, just a little baby in a growing town. I was son to Alfred and Clarissa Burnage, fine folks. If you've seen my father's mustache, you would think that he was either a mayor, a governor, or maybe a riverboat gambler. Big bushy thing. I was not an only child, no, just had a brother, Jesse, and 3 sisters, Elva, Elizabeth, and Grace. Fine family. Kind of family that stuck together, and in hot days stuck to each other. You have that great air conditioning these days, and a blessed day that it's nice and cool. They laid me out in a lined suit. So my, I'm happy for the nice cool day today. When I was a young man, I had what you might call a spirited sense of adventure, or poor judgment, depending on who was telling the story. One fateful night, I was 18 years old, I went out with the boys, and we thought it would be a fine idea to go hop a freight train. This, of course, mind you, was after a little refreshment. There's no proof to that, but, well, I lost my step. I fell. Before I knew it, I was under the wheels. I lost my left foot that night. Hobbled around like a pirate for the next 3 decades until I lost the rest of the leg in 1910. But does that keep a good man down? No, not at all. Not me. It just makes me better at finding a nearby chair, which they gave me one. That's very kind of them. Yes, I know. That's not the story I should be telling. I should be telling the story about how I met my Ellen. She played tambourine for the Salvation Army. Could you imagine that? A woman with rhythm and righteousness. I fell for her like a sack of potatoes. And she picked me up just as easy. We were married June 13th, 1895, and she kept that tambourine and my spirits rattling for over 50 years. We had quite a brood together, 7 sons and 2 daughters. We also had probably more than our share of sorrow. We lost our dear Walter in 1909, little Clarissa in 1920, Lorian in 22. Our eldest Charlie, he passed just a year before I did, in 1948. Ellen beat me here too. In 1949, I arrived just shortly thereafter. But we all found each other, separated by just a few rows. You might be able to see it if you look way back there, just over the ridge, there's a flag that they put up, and that's where we all are. When I was a young man, I worked alongside my father, hauling freight as a drayman. We lived in a house in Elgin on the west side, nothing fancy, just full of family and coffee. I miss coffee. I haven't had, oh my, a good cup of coffee. The kind of coffee that takes the paint off the porch, that strong coffee, yeah. When was it? 1907, I ran for the Elgin Township Road Commissioner. My father, again, had a lot to do with it. He was constable in 1888, and so he knew half the town. But I will say this, during my watch, the newspapers declared that Elgin had the finest roads this section of the country. Imagine that, right here in Elgin. Not bad for a fellow with one leg. And a love of gravel. They gave me some gravel to make me feel comfortable. That's awful nice. Politically speaking, I was a dyed-in-the-wool Republican. Now, that's the kind of Republicans the early 1900s. I can't say how the party's changed since then. But what I can say is I like my taxes low, I like my boots American-made, and I like my newspapers full of good grammar. When I wasn't building roads and bridges and whatnot, I had an odd habit of collecting odds and ends made out of wood that are shaped like animals or snakes or whatnot. Don't ask me why, it just tickled me. I kept them out at one of our cottages on either Lake Geneva or Turtle Lake. We'd go out there, brought company, sit down, fishing pole in one hand, lemonade in another. Sometimes a splash of something stronger in the lemonade, depending on the company. When I hung up my hat, my son Logan took over. And then his son, Rick. And then his son-in-law, Jason Krabby. And he's doing it today. Now that's what I call legacy. I like to think that we Burnages paved more than roads. We paved a path to success in our community, a promise to keep Elgin rolling on the finest roads possible. So thank you kindly for indulging me, letting an old ghost ramble on a little bit. When you're on your way home and you're enjoying a nice smooth road, give a nod to Charlie Burnage. My favorite road is Illinois Parkway. My house, they say, still stands over there. Burnage Park practically was my backyard. So have a smooth road drive home. Ellen says, keep your tambourines rattling. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Burnett. You actually have to stand up and almost stand where I am to see the top of the white flag over the ridge.
Yep.
Where the gravesite
There aren't any Burnages in our group, are there? There was a whole bunch of Burnages, my descendants, here yesterday. I met my grandson, Charles, namesake too, Charles Harrison Burnage, was here and he came up and talked to me. It was wonderful to see him, a whole bunch of others. So much better to meet them here in person than visiting them while they're sleeping. So, scared the hell out of them. Yeah. Thank you all.
August Sheila emigrated from Germany at the young age of 13, eventually landing in Elgin, where he befriended fellow countrymen and helped build Elgin into a bustling city. In 1878, he began clerking in a general store, and by 1889 was the sole proprietor of a small basement grocery. 6 years later, he moved upstairs, and in 1898, baked goods were added to the store. Sheila Grocery at the corner of Douglas and Division was a staple in Elgin for decades, being called one of the largest grocery stores in the Middle West by 1910. Much of the sales volume was achieved through home deliveries, first by horse and wagon, then adding motor trucks as early as 1915. Think of that. DoorDash 110 years ago, right here in Elgin.
Allow me to introduce a true Renaissance woman and road trip enthusiast, Alice Bird Potter.
Hi everyone, my name is Alice Bird Potter, as our guide correctly said, but my friends call me Bird or Birdie. Feel free to do the same. I was born in 1875 in Elgin, and my ancestral roots are impressive, I think. Father became a businessman in Elgin, entering the butter business. In fact, he was president of the Elgin Board of Trade, which set butter prices worldwide in the beginning of the century, right here in Elgin. I'm a daughter of the American Revolution. I'm also a direct descendant of Roger Williams, the founder of the state of Rhode Island. And perhaps it is this bloodline that gave me my adventurous spirit. In 1895, I married a fellow named John Tetzner. We had a small wedding ceremony at my parents' home at 518 East Chicago Street, and then we spent our married years living there with them. John and I shared a love of music, and both were rather talented ourselves. John taught violin and was himself an excellent violinist. For 15 years, he was the head of the Elgin Military Band, the National Watch Factory Traveling Band. As I said, I too possessed musical talent. I taught guitar, mandolin, banjo, piano, voice, and dance. I led an all-female orchestra in town, and I composed songs. Perhaps you've heard one or two of them. Well, 9 years to the day of our marriage, John left our residence. 4 years later, I was granted a divorce on the grounds of desertion. But it was an amicable separation, and neither of us ever spoke ill of the other. After the divorce, I was granted permission by the courts to take back my maiden name. So, if I'm known as a musician, why then am I dressed like this? Well, in the early part of the 1900s, our country became quite interested in cross-country car runs. And it was during this time that I became, well, somewhat of a celebrity in the fascinating world of automobiles. In 1907, I drove a Haynes racing car, competing for the title Champion Lady Driver of the West, and I won that title in a 3-mile exhibition. Now, because we are friends, I'll tell you that I won that title by default. The other 2 women who had entered the race were unwilling to drive the rough track and pulled out of the competition. But I drove the 3 miles and legitimately won that title. Now, perhaps what I'm better known for is my cross-country trek in 1908. In fact, that is what is engraved on my grave marker up the hill there. I was the first woman to drive from Chicago to New York, unaccompanied by a male chaperone. Allow me to share a few details of that event. It was July 16th, 1908, and I left Chicago with 2 girlfriends and a female chaperone, and I was the only one in the car who knew how to drive. I drove an early model Haynes. The Haynes company said that Our trip, over 2,000 miles, was the best performance that model had ever made. Not one adjustment needed to be made to the engine. Not one bolt or screw needed tightening. However, we did make one unscheduled stop when we picked up a nail in one of the tires. But if anything had been needed on that car, it would have been me who was the mechanic. Now bear in mind, at that time, most roads were not paved. We were driving on gravel, sand, dirt, and that required skilled driving. I'd been driving for about 3 years before our trip, and I had about 15,000 miles of driving experience, so I was confident of a successful trip. Now, that did not prevent us from continuously praying for good weather. The trip was wonderful, full of so many sights. We made several stops along the way, as this was not a race. We made one stop in Hobart, Indiana, where we were treated to a banquet by 40 Haynes owners in the area. Early brand loyalty. The newspapers covered our trip, and the Buffalo Express called me an expert mechanic, tire repairer, oiler, general expert. It made our trip incredible. They did forget, however, to mention that I was an excellent driver. Nonetheless, we arrived at our destination in New York on July 28th, and then we stayed in the city for a time, well, to enjoy the city. The return trip was a similar route, and we arrived back in Chicago August 22nd. Arriving back in Chicago, I continued to work on automobiles. I backed the efforts of the Elgin road races, even though, because I was a woman, I was unable to compete in them. In 1909, I started planning another trip, this time west, from Chicago to San Francisco. Oh, that trip never came to fruition, but I continued to work on automobiles and drive the roads of Elgin and the surrounding area. I think my favorite was probably what some people were calling Lake Street. This was the route that I took to Chicago before turning and heading east on my great trip to New York. And after 1926, it became a part of US Route 20, America's longest road, and it runs right through Elgin. Well, back in Elgin, I went back to my busy life, automobiles, and giving music lessons out of my home on Chicago Street, but I never stopped dreaming of future races. In fact, I almost entered an air race in New York, though I had no flying experience. You've probably noted that living life to the fullest was a personal goal of my entire life, and I did just that, living to the good old age of 80, dying in St. Joseph Hospital in 1955. The open road and good music were the great joys of my life, and I am so glad to have shared some of these stories with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Bertie.
Thank you.
The 3 mausoleums built into the side of the hill are among Bluff City's oldest burials, original to Bluff City Cemetery, not relocated from the former Channing Cemetery since its dedication in 1886. The late 19th century is sometimes called the Gilded Age. People of means prominently displayed their wealth in life and, as you can see here, also in death. These family burial structures commemorate the Elginites interred and contribute to the architectural heritage of historic Elgin. On the right, the French crypt is a neoclassical style. Look at its prominent architrave. That is the horizontal feature spanning the width just above the name French. Now observe the frieze and cornice. That is the overhanging molding on the roof. Also neoclassical is the pediment-styled roof. Do you see the triangular-shaped gable? Finally, notice the scallop shell acroterion, otherwise known as a keystone, with what appears to be the French family's coat of arms. This mausoleum holds the remains of Eliza Jane Cox French. Originally from New Hampshire, she lived 40 years in Elgin until her death in 1895 at age 65. And in the center, the Schween family crypt architecture is Romanesque revival, with some neoclassical elements such as the pediment-style roof and the simplified acroterion at the top of the gable. This mausoleum holds William Schween, who emigrated from Germany, settling in Cook County in 1837. He arrived in the newly incorporated city of Chicago, a single 22-year-old, $14 in debt. He went on to build a large family and fortune right here in Elgin. He and his wife, Sophia Bushy, also from Germany, had 5 children. William Schween, his wife, and 4 of his 5 children lived to their 80s and 90s. This is remarkable longevity. In 1900, the life expectancy of white men in the United States was only 47, and black women, just 33. In the family crypt are William Schween, his wife Sophia, their daughter Louisa, and her husband, Charles Bushy, and 3 additional family members. The Schween and Bushy families have many relatives buried in the cemetery and many more living in the area to this day. Now, the Garrison Mausoleum on the left here, apparently built in 1899, is Romanesque revival, with its large arched entry and use of rusticated stone masonry. Note the contrasting colors of limestone and the red granite of the Corinthian-styled squat columns. This crypt holds 7 members of the Garrison farming family, from Patriarch Joseph Garrison, who passed away in 1903 at 75 years old, to Donald, who in the same year succumbed at the age of 9 from complications of diphtheria, now a vaccine-preventable disease.
I would like to introduce the man who brought the road race to Elgin, Frank Tootie Wood.
Good afternoon, everyone. They called me crazy for wanting to race through cornfields, but I always believe that speed has a place, even in a quiet town like Elgin. My name is Frank Tootie Wood, and I was born in Huntley in 1877 alongside my twin sister Florence. We moved to Elgin in 1881, where my father Delmont Wood made his name as a premier butter manufacturer and served as president of the Elgin National Bank. This afforded our family a comfortable life at Wood Mansion alongside my mother Josephine and my sisters. I proudly walked the halls of Elgin Public Schools growing up, and even studied 3 years at the Elgin Academy before heading off to Pennsylvania Military College. And although the Spanish-American War broke out during my time there, I never saw active service. Back home, I worked for my father's butter company in the bank, but I could never shake my fascination for the growing automobile industry. I worked to found the Elgin Automobile Club of 1904, pulling together auto enthusiasts who, like myself, believed there was more to these machines than just utility. Shortly after, I married Florence Baker, a woman whose talent matched her spirit. She was an artist trained at the Chicago Art Institute with a love of music and a streak of mischief. While at her wedding, she pulled off a stunt that would make any race driver proud. While my childhood pals were preparing to shower us with rice, Florence slipped out the back in a waitress uniform, rushing to her friend's house where we had stashed our honeymoon bag. I followed shortly after, and together we took a 3-week, 1,000-mile trip through Wisconsin in my red Rambler. That trip was perfect, and my heart was full. I had found my co-pilot for life. We returned to Elgin and welcomed their daughter Elizabeth. And I turned my love of cars into a business, opening up a garage and a dealership, selling Ramblers and Fords. But selling wasn't enough. I craved the drive. I entered century runs and 100-mile loop treks. And the more I raced, the more the open road pulled at me like gravity. Then came my big idea. The Chicago Motor Club race circuit based out of Crown Point, Indiana was flawed. Too many hazards and logistical issues. So I thought, why not bring the thrill of road racing right here to Elgin? I scouted until I found a loop northwest of town. No rail crossings, no towns, no steep hills, just open rolling roadway that begged for speed. It was a natural race course hidden in plain sight and with easy access to the city of Chicago. And to my delight, the Motor Club gave us a green light. We formed the Elgin National Road Race Association, and I set to work fundraising and prepping the course. But life, like racing, has its sharp turns. Just weeks after our approval, my mother's fears came true. Driving down Villa Street, which is now called Route 20, with my friend Ed Reed, I swerved to avoid a farmer's wagon. The car struck a warning post. The iron crossbar snapped and struck me across the face, breaking both of my jaws and injuring Ed. It was a type of wreck that most don't walk away from. But that's what the papers reported. But you can't keep a racer in the hospital for long, not when the starting flag is right around the bend. A couple of weeks later, a couple of surgeries later, I was back behind the wheel, wife and daughter by my side, bruised but unbroken. And sure, the papers were astounded with reports of me racing to death's door a few weeks earlier, but I had cars to run, and I needed to get back in the driver's seat. And thankfully, I made it out in time to test the track that I had fought so hard for. And what an experience. We only got our vehicles up to 72 miles an hour, but you should have seen us jump. Those cars sure bite into the roadway. The first Elgin National Road Races of 1910 were a major success, with speeds that pleased both drivers and spectators alike. My favorite stretch of road still today is the section of Highland Avenue approaching Coombs Road that we call Aviator's Hill, because racers briefly went airborne here. Although I would never participate in any of the races, I was the flagman for another decade for all of the races that Elgin would see. Funny, isn't it, to have an accident survivor like me in charge of flagmen that would warn drivers of hazards and obstructions on the road. Don't worry, the humor's not lost on me. I was now part of the machine that was racing, and it was great. They called me Major later in life after my service in World War I, and I lived a long life to nearly 100 years old. I never lost my love of machines and good stories. And you may not believe this because I've been known to love and tell a good tall tale, but I was there to help start the motor for the Wright brothers for their Kitty Hawk flight. I even flew a plane solo once just to see if the sky felt like the road. They say the mark of a man is not what he builds, but what lasts after he's gone. I may not have invented the automobile, I may not have become a famous racer, but I gave Elgin a reason to believe in speed, and for me, that was always enough. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. This tall, brown, reddish monument is his gravestone with the mum in front of it. So he's buried right here. Elgin Road Races would attract 50,000 people for the weekend of racing in Elgin in its heyday. Onward.
You guys have a great day.
Thank you.
This Indy car from 1940 tells an interesting story. In 1895, a young Martin Skoke had been shipped from Czechoslovakia to his mother in Chicago by an aunt via parcel post. Mr. Skoke landed here in Elgin in 1918 and was the founder of Elgin Machine Works. building 16 cars used for race car driving between 1926 and 1954. Various drivers drove Elgin piston pin special cars in the Indy 500 starting in the late 20s, with one of the goals of racing being to showcase the high-quality manufacturing of their piston pins and the many other replacement auto parts that the company made. During World War II, Elgin Machine Works produced parts for tanks, airplanes, jeeps, switching to 100% war effort manufacturing. While Martin Skoke died in 1966, the Skoke family legacy continues, including a memorial fountain unveiled in 2016 on DuPage Court, honoring the legacy of Martin Skoke Jr. In 2019, the Skoke's beloved company celebrated 100 years of high-quality precision manufacturing right here in Elgin.
I am honored to introduce a veteran, innovative businessman, and founder of McGrath Empire of Car Dealerships, Leo McGrath.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming out. My name is Leo James McGrath, and my journey to becoming the founder of the family car business, well, that began quite a ways from here. I was born in the small town of Grace City, North Dakota, on December 18th, 1921. I was the oldest of 5 children, and I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and that's likely where I learned about the notion of being in charge, something I would grow fond of. My father was a World War I Army veteran, which I think you'll conclude had a big impact on my life. And my mom, well, she had her hands full with the 5 of us, 6 if you throw in my father. And I learned a lot about the importance of work ethic from her. When I was 14, we moved from Grace City to Caledonia, Minnesota. And it's there that I finished high school and would end up meeting my future wife, Jean, on a blind date set up by my sister. I spent many years in Caledonia. After high school, I worked in an aircraft factory building planes. And that was good, honest, interesting work, but perhaps most important, provided me from some important experience for what was to come. You see, I was building planes in 1941 when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. And after we declared war on Japan, and in turn Germany and Italy declared war on us, well, I knew it wouldn't be that long that I would move off the side of the road and get more involved. I joined the Marine Corps, the Air Division in particular, and saw action in the Pacific. It's there that my skills as a pilot were proven, but it certainly helped that I knew the machines I was flying inside and out. By about 1945, the wheels had kind of come off the Axis powers and the war came to a close. I was honorably discharged at the rank of First Lieutenant, having earned a Distinguished Flying Cross in the process. I then returned home to Caledonia, and it's there that I started my first business with my father. I was only 24, but we bought a gas station, and we sold Buicks and GMCs on the lot. This would lay the foundation for a career in automobiles, though I certainly would have never thought of that at that time. And truth be told, we probably sold a whole lot more gasoline than we did cars, but I was learning, and I was developing a real ambition to own my own business. At that point in time, I really felt my life was traveling in the right direction. We had a successful business. I married Jean about a year later, and we were starting a family. But it was also around that time that the winds of war were stirring up once again, this time in Korea. North Korea invaded South Korea, and it wasn't long before the United States got involved once again. And in 1952, I was recalled into active service by the Marines. However, this time I wouldn't be doing the fighting. It was actually my knowledge of the aircraft that would be most important to this war effort. You see, prior to this moment, pilots had driven propeller-driven planes. But now, jets were fueled by propulsion. So I headed off to Cherry Point, North Carolina to be a jet fighter pilot instructor. Now that was not the end of my flying days. In fact, one of the honors of my lifetime came in 1953 when I was chosen to lead the flyover at President Eisenhower's inauguration. I stayed on training pilots for a few years, even after that war ended, but eventually, again, was honorably discharged, this time at the rank of major. I should note that I never lost my love for flying, owning about 14 planes across the years, and flying until I was 70 years old. Now, you might be able to tell that my leadership skills were honed by a life of family and business and military service. So it's not a surprise necessarily that I started to race ahead once I returned to the car business. But how did that happen? And how did I end up here in Elgin? Well, that part of the story begins in 1953, when I came to Chicago to work for the Buick Auto Division, eventually becoming their Western Area Training Manager by 1960s. Now that work involved a lot of travel and corporate transfers, but it also served to rekindle my desire to own my own business. And that, well, that happened right here in Elgin in 1964. I purchased what had been the first Buick dealership. Some of you will meet today David McBride. He was the original owner of that Buick dealership. It was located on what we called Automobile Row on South Grove Avenue. After I opened that dealership, I brought my entire family to Elgin, and that's when things really started to move ahead. I poured my heart into the dealerships, based upon a very simple philosophy of putting customers first and treating them like family. I love to make deals. And as some of you might know, soon it would be hard to avoid buying a car from me. As an entrepreneur, I would say I brought some vision to the car business as well. I expanded the dealerships I owned, eventually laying the foundation for what today is the McGrath Auto Group, the family business that is actually sponsoring the Cemetery Walk, or one of the sponsors today, and I'm very proud of that. I was credited with bringing the notion of red tag sales to Elgin, where dealerships would put a tag on the automobiles so customers could see when they came in the showroom or on the lot exactly how much they'd have to pay for the car. Sooner than most in the late 1960s, I saw the potential of, at that time, what was a very obscure car manufacturer. So I decided to take a chance and add Honda to the McGrath family in 1969. Eventually opening the first freestanding Honda dealership in the Chicago-Land area. And I would say that that decision worked out pretty well for the McGrath family. And then I worked with my son Michael to open and develop the idea of the Heritage Village Auto Complex, which today is really became what the forerunner for what today is really known as the Auto Mall. By 1990, after I opened McGrath Nissan, I knew that I was getting on down the road a bit, and I decided to let my children take control of the wheel and steer the direction of the company. 6 out of my 7 children actually got into auto sales, and I stuck around to offer advice and support when needed, and maybe sometimes when not needed, but I'm very proud of what the family developed. Looking back, my favorite roads in Elgin are the ones that sold automobiles. First South Grove Avenue, then Chicago Street, and now Randall Road. I lived to the age of 85 and passed in 2007. And although I'm not actually buried here in Elgin, I'm buried instead in West Dundee, I am very proud to have been part of the car business, more so the people business, right here in Elgin. Thank you so much for coming out today.
Thank you. Well done.
Enjoy your evening.
Thank you, Mr. McGrath.
Stay cool.
We hope you enjoyed the 38th Annual Bluff City Cemetery Tour presented by the Elgin History Museum. The proceeds from this event support the History Museum and its mission to collect, preserve, display, and teach Elgin's rich history. If you haven't visited the museum lately, we invite you to drop in Wednesday through Saturday. The exhibits are updated regularly, and we're always looking for new members and volunteers. Keep an eye out in 2026 for various celebrations of US 20 across the country, some of them right here in Elgin. We hope to see you next year.